Do you hear that? Eric Draven crouched in the rusted shadows of the labor camp's outer perimeter, his pulse steady as death. He tilted his head slightly, listening, not just with his ears, but with everything. The air carried a whisper of something beneath the familiar industrial groans of machinery and the clank of slave chains. The vibrations rippling through the cold earth beneath his boots told him what was coming before he saw it. His second-in-command, Victor Rass, shifted beside him, breath fogging the frozen air. That's a patrol crawler. Sweep patterns tight, no gaps in the route. If we don't time this down to the last breath, we're dead before we cross that gate. Eric's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Then we won't give them time to breathe. Above them, Sarnak 7 loomed like a skeletal corpse of a world. What had once been a lush moon full of resources was now stripped to rock and ruin, its sky forever choked with ash from Dominion industry. The Kordrath had turned it into a graveyard of stolen lives, 10 million humans trapped in its gut, ground into nothing beneath the weight of Dominion chains. Not tonight. Eric lifted his wrist, activating the heads-up display embedded in his armor's forearm plating. A crude map of the facility flared to life, pulsing with marked entry points. Inside, at least 200 prisoners had been prepped for transport to another Dominion world. The Kordrath were shifting their assets, which meant they saw humanity as nothing more than cargo to be reshuffled between factories. They wouldn't live to regret it. He turned to the strike team, 8 men hardened by loss, tempered by fury. Their faces were etched with the kind of quiet violence that only came from those who had already decided they weren't making it out alive. He gestured once. Go. The first to move was Rowan, a demolitions expert with a talent for ugly surprises. He slithered toward the security pylon, slipping into the blind spots between the watchtowers. The Dominion's arrogance was woven into every inch of this place. The watchlights flickered lazily. The automated turrets tracked wide arcs with sluggish indifference. They thought their dominion over humanity was absolute. Eric intended to correct that mistake. Victor pressed a blade into his palm, the handle cold against his skin. You lead the breach, I cover the control room. Eric nodded. Stay quiet. If you get spotted, we don't have time to clean it up. A soft scoff. If I get spotted, there won't be anything left to clean. Their moment of stillness shattered with a thunderous detonation. The north wall burst inward, fire and debris swallowing the sentries whole. The scream of rending metal carved through the night, followed by the unmistakable sound of Dominion rifle fire. Sharp, rapid bursts as guards scrambled to react. Eric surged forward, his body a weapon honed for this exact moment. He slid beneath the first line of incoming fire, rising only to plant a blade in the throat of a Dominion enforcer. The alien let out a strangled hiss as its thick black blood spattered across the ground, steaming against the frigid surface. Chaos unfurled. Prisoners surged from the barracks, their chains still fastened but their fury unchained. They overwhelmed their captors with sheer force, driving them back with stolen weapons, with fists, with teeth. Eric didn't need to order them. Rage had already given them purpose. Control room. Victor barked over the rising violence. Eric bolted toward the central tower. Weaving through the fray, his boots pounded against the blood-slick ground as a Dominion sentry leveled a weapon at his chest. Before it could fire, a human prisoner, an old man with hollow eyes and calloused hands, hurled himself onto the alien's back, dragging it to the ground with an unyielding grip. The old man locked eyes with Arik just before the guard's plasma blade buried itself in his ribs. He smiled. Arik kept moving. The control hub loomed ahead, a fortress of Dominion arrogance wrapped in steel and false security. Arik slammed his shoulder into the entrance hatch, his armor plating absorbing the impact as the door buckled. Inside, Dominion officers scrambled to react, their bulbous eyes widening as they realized what was happening. Too late. Arik threw his knife, the blade embedding itself in the throat of the nearest officer before the others could even reach their weapons. He ripped a rifle from the dying alien's hands and fired a burst into the next. Victor swept in behind him, his own blade flashing through the dim light, slicing down the last enforcer before they could even scream. Seal the doors, Arik ordered. Victor smashed his fist into the nearest console. Lockdowns engaged. The entire facility was now under their control. Arik activated the central comm system. He took a breath, steadying the fire burning in his lungs. Then he spoke, low, cold, and absolute. To every human in this facility, your captors are dead men. Take what weapons you can. We walk out of here tonight, or we die standing. Either way, we are no longer slaves. The response was instant, a chorus of war cries, a sound no Dominion had ever feared before now. Outside, the prison walls crumbled under the weight of detonation charges. A second explosion rocked the sky, a fireball erupting from the guard towers as Rowan's final trick went off. The entire northern defense line collapsed in an instant. Incoming, one of Arik's men barked over comms. A Dominion kill team descended from the upper atmosphere, streaking toward them like hunting birds. Their armored drop pods hit the ground with seismic force, splitting open to reveal Cordras shock troopers, their obsidian exosuits gleaming under the artificial light. Their rifles hissed as they charged energy rounds, enough to reduce unarmored bodies to vapor. The air went electric. Victor rolled his shoulders, exhaling slowly. Well, that escalated. Arik chambered a fresh round. Let them come. The first volley split the night, searing plasma rounds cutting through the air. Arik dove into cover, rolling as the ground melted beneath the heat of enemy fire. He flicked open his comms. Rowan, give me something. The demolitionist's voice crackled through. Get clear of the control room. I left a gift in the sub-levels. Arik didn't need to be told twice. Move. The team sprinted just as an underground detonation ripped through the facility's core. The control hub folded in on itself, collapsing into a crater of fire and smoke. The Dominion kill squad, caught mid-charge, vanished in the inferno. Arik didn't look back. He grabbed the nearest freed prisoner by the arm. Take the wounded. Get to the drop point. The man, still shaking from the carnage, swallowed hard and nodded. Victor slung a rifle over his shoulder, stepping up beside him. So about that fleet you promised us. Arik scanned the horizon, where the stars pulsed beyond the thinning smog. We build one, he said. And then we burn their empire down. The embers of Sarnak 7 still burned in the distance, a smoldering grave for the Dominion's arrogance. Ash clung to the air like the last breath of a dying world, curling in the cold wind as the newly freed prisoners trudged into the makeshift encampment. Their eyes flickered with the raw edge of survival, wide, untrusting, still waiting for the next cruelty to descend upon them. Arik Draven stood at the edge of the landing zone, his gaze fixed on the sky, where Dominion reinforcements would soon come hunting for them. The prison break had been an opening move. Now came the impossible part, turning desperation into an army. Behind him, Victor Reyes pulled a strip of bloodied cloth from his arm, flexing his fingers to test the wound beneath. You realize we've got maybe 3 hours before the Dominion starts sweeping this system. He nodded toward the refugees huddled together, some still wrapped in tattered uniforms, others in rags. Half of them can't even hold a weapon, let alone fight. Arik's jaw tightened. They don't have to fight yet, they just have to survive. Victor exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. Survival's a long game, Draven. We need ships, weapons, somewhere to put them that isn't a damned crater. Arik scanned the remnants of their force, fighters, smugglers, broken men with nothing left to lose. Scattered cells just like humanity itself. Then we stop running. We consolidate. The air rumbled as a transport broke through the upper atmosphere, streaking toward the outpost with a heat trail that shimmered against the dark. It wasn't Dominion. The hull was too scarred, the movement too erratic. That'll be Rowan, Victor muttered. If he didn't get himself vaporized first. The ship came down hard, skidding against the dirt before stabilizers hissed into place. As the ramp lowered, a wiry figure strode down, face streaked with sweat and dust. Rowan was grinning, the kind of reckless satisfaction only a demolitionist could wear after barely surviving his own work. I'd ask if you missed me, but I know the answer, Rowan called, wiping grime from his brow. Arik stepped forward. Tell me you brought something we can use. Rowan jerked a thumb over his shoulder. Scavenged what I could off a Dominion outpost before we blew the hell out of Sarnak. Weapons, a few scrap fighters, not enough to stage a war, but enough to make one hell of an opening statement. A ripple of anticipation passed through the gathered men. The thought of striking back, of taking something instead of losing everything, was a whisper of purpose in the darkness. Victor crossed his arms. Where do you plan to park an army, Draven? Dominion's got every major trade route locked. No port's stupid enough to shelter us. Arik tilted his head toward the stars, toward the ship graveyards orbiting long-dead battlefields. Then we find somewhere no one wants to look. Rowan's grin widened. You're thinking of Raxall Drift, aren't you? Victor let out something between a scoff and a curse. That place is a death trap. No functioning atmospheres, no supply chains, and it's crawling with scavenger cults that'd rather strip you for parts than shake your hand. Arik turned to face the men gathered around them, his voice even. We've been written off. The Dominion thinks we're broken. We don't have the luxury of a perfect battlefield. We take what's left and we turn it into something stronger. Rowan clapped his hands together. I like it. Hell, I like anything that keeps us breathing long enough to get real payback. Victor rolled his eyes, but the tension in his posture eased just a fraction. Then we move now. If the Dominion's watching the system, we're already on borrowed time. Eureka Pafshiti gave a sharp nod. Load up, we leave in 10. The rush to board was efficient, but desperate men clutching what few possessions they had, others taking up weapons like they weren't sure whether to use them or hold them for luck. The transport's interior was cramped, the smell of old fuel and scorched circuitry curling through the vents as they strapped in. As the ship rose from the barren surface, Eureka settled into the cockpit beside the pilot, scanning the readouts on the laser plasma display. Enemy transmissions crackled through encrypted channels, signals bouncing across Dominion relay points. They know we're here, Victor muttered. They just don't know where we're going. Eureka Paf's fingers tightened around the console. Let's keep it that way. The stars bent and blurred as the transport punched into FTL, streaking toward the dead husk of Raxall Drift. The old battlefield was worse than Eureka remembered. Twisted hulks of ships, remnants from a war fought decades ago, hung in the void like shattered bones. The Dominion never bothered clearing the wreckage. There was nothing left to claim, nothing worth salvaging. But Eureka Paf saw something different. That's a scrapyard, Victor muttered, eyeing the floating debris. Eureka Paf's attrition didn't shift. That's a fleet waiting to happen. Rochette let a low whistle. You really think we can patch something together from this mess? Eureka Paf leaned forward, staring at the wreckage like a sculptor might study raw stone before the first strike of the chisel. We don't need ships that shine. We need ships that kill. A moment of silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken possibility. Victor exhaled, shaking his head. You're going to get us all killed. Eureka Paf shuddered, finally smiled. The first real one since Sarnak 7. Only if I fail. The transport glided deeper into the wreckage, weaving between the shattered remains of forgotten battles. Dead war machines drifted silently, some still scarred by energy burns that had never cooled. But there was potential here. Engines that could be stripped, hull plating that could be reforged, weapons waiting to be resurrected. Eureka Paf stood, gripping the back of the pilot's seat. This is where it starts. Victor looked out at the ruin and saw ghosts. Eureka Plottage looked at the same wreckage and saw an armory. Eureka was the first to break the silence. We need engineers. We need supplies. We'll get them, Eureka Paf said. But first, the transport's sensors flared red. A proximity alert. Something's moving in the wreckage. The pilot said, hands tightening over the controls. Victor's eyes darkened. Scavenger cults. Eureka reached for his rifle, checking the charge. Only one way to find out. The ship dipped lower, shadows curling over the hull as they descended into the graveyard. Somewhere in the drifting ruin, something was waiting for them. The wreckage of Raxall Drift stretched in every direction. A labyrinth of shattered warships and forgotten husks. A graveyard of metal and death, floating silently in the black void. Somewhere in that tangled ruin, something moved. Eureka Draven stood at the laser plasma display inside the cramped cockpit of their repurposed transport, studying the shifting heat signatures flickering across the screen. Something's alive down there, he muttered. Victor Reyes, arms crossed, leaned against the bulkhead. Alive doesn't mean friendly. Rohan, seated at the pilot's station, twisted a loose wire between his fingers. Could be scavenger cults, could be automated sentries, could be something worse. Eureka turned toward the viewport. Beyond the ship's reinforced glass, the drifting ruins loomed like broken fangs. His gut told him there were no easy answers in this place. If they wanted to build a fleet, they would have to take it. Bring us in slow, Alacrity ordered. Weapons hot, no signals. If something's waiting, let's make sure we see it before it sees us. The ship dipped into the wreckage, gliding between the skeletal remains of warships long forgotten. Burned scars laced the hulls, carbon scoring from battles that had ended decades ago. Some ships still bore the insignia of civilizations the Dominion had long since crushed. This place was a relic of the past, but to Arik, it was the beginning of something new. A warning light flickered on the heads-up display. Contacts, Rohan said, voice low. 3 ships, minimal power signatures. They're running dark. Victor shifted, hand drifting toward his sidearm. They know we're here. Alacrity exhaled, slow and deliberate. Then let's introduce ourselves. A crackling transmission bled through the comms, distorted and guttural, an old Terran dialect, warped by years of isolation. You have no business here. Arik glanced at Victor before responding. We didn't come for a fight. A long pause. Then the voice came again, rough and edged with suspicion. Then why are your weapons armed? Arik smiled, though it held no humor. Because I don't trust anyone who hides in the wreckage of dead worlds. A static-laced chuckle. Clever, but not clever enough. The wreckage around them shifted. At first, Arik thought it was just debris dislodging, but then the outlines of ships emerged from the shadows, their rusted hulls blending into the wreckage. A fleet hidden in plain sight. Old Terran warships, patched together with scavenged Dominion tech, their weapons still deadly, despite their age. Looks like we found our first recruits, Rohan muttered. Arik nodded once. Or our first enemies. The comms crackled again. You'll power down now, or we'll scatter you across the drift. Victor raised an eyebrow. They sure know how to make friends. Arik clicked the comm. If you wanted us dead, you wouldn't be talking. Let's have a real conversation. Another pause, then finally, dock at the Vanguard's wrath. No sudden moves. Rohan let out a low whistle. That's an old war cruiser. No way it should still be running. Arik's fingers tightened on the controls. Then someone's been keeping it alive. The transport angled toward the Vanguard's wrath, a hulking behemoth that had no business still being in one piece. Its hull was stitched together with scavenged plating, and its engines glowed with a sickly blue light, barely functional but still burning. As they docked, the airlock cycled open with a groaning hiss. Beyond it, the figures waiting for them were armed and weathered, men who had long since given up hope of seeing Earth again. The leader stepped forward, tall, scarred, eyes like tempered steel. He studied Arik with a cold detachment, then nodded once. Draven, thought you died at Sarnak. Arik's lips pressed into a thin line. Seems like a lot of people thought that. The man Gideon Voss smirked. But it didn't reach his eyes. You must be desperate if you came here looking for help. Arik shrugged. I could say the same for you. This fleet's held together with spit and prayers. You've been waiting for something, for someone. Voss's expression didn't change. And what exactly are you offering? Arik stepped closer, voice steady. A chance to fight back, a chance to make the Dominion afraid. Voss studied him for a long moment, then glanced at Victor and Rohan before speaking. You've got nerve, but nerve doesn't build a fleet. Arik met his gaze without flinching. No, but a purpose does. Voss exhaled through his nose. We talk in private. Inside the Vanguard's wrath, the corridors reeked of old fire and desperation. The ship was a tomb, patched together with whatever the crew could salvage. They passed men working on exposed wiring, welding panels, patching hull breaches with whatever they could scavenge. In the war room, a cracked heads-up display flickered to life, displaying a tactical map of the drift and surrounding space. Voss crossed his arms. You want a fleet? You'll need more than rusted warships and wishful thinking. Arik studied the display, then tapped a marked location, Fornax Prime. Dominion's warship production hub. That's where we start. Victor stiffened. You're insane, that's their core supply line. Rohan let out a low chuckle. And if we take it, they choke. Voss narrowed his eyes. You're talking about stealing a Juggernaut-class dreadnought. Arik nodded. We don't have time to build a fleet from scraps. We take their war machines and turn them against them. Silence stretched, thick and unyielding. Then Voss let out a slow breath. You're serious. Arik's voice was steel. I didn't crawl out of Sarnak 7 to play defense. Voss studied him for a long moment. Then finally, he smiled. Then let's steal ourselves a warship. Outside the drift remained silent, but something had changed. The dead fleet was waking, and the Dominion had no idea what was coming. Fornax Prime was a fortress world. Its orbital shipyards stretched like the ribcage of some ancient beast, warships locked into their berths, like teeth bared in a silent snarl. It was the Dominion's lifeline, their foundry of conquest, and soon it would belong to humanity. Inside the Vanguard's wrath, the air was tense, thick with the weight of what they were about to attempt. The ship's aging command deck flickered with readouts, status reports, encrypted signals, and the shifting data of Fornax's defense grid, slowly decrypted by Rohan's team. Voss stood with arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the laser plasma display where the war map illuminated their target. One Juggernaut-class dreadnought, anchored at Dock 17, fully operational. Minimal crew on board for final systems testing. Ulrich leaned forward, studying the wireframe projection of the warship. Its shape was a thing of brutal design, tapered armor layers, weapon arrays embedded like blades in its hull, and an engine core that could power a fleet on its own. If they could seize it, the Dominion's own technology would turn against them. If this goes wrong, Victor muttered, it won't just be us who burn. Every survivor, every hidden cell, we're gambling everything. Ulrich's fingers curled into his palm. We don't have time for slow victories. We take their war machines, or we lose. Rohan cracked his knuckles, grinning. Then let's take it. The plan was simple. The execution, anything but. The Vanguard's wrath dropped out of FTL just beyond Fornax's sensor net, the rest of the fleet holding in silent formation. A single stolen Dominion transport, repainted in enemy colors, signal scramblers masking its true identity, drifted toward Dock 17, carrying Eric, Victor, Rohan, and a hand-picked strike team. Inside the cramped bay, the scent of heated metal and recycled oxygen filled the air. Boots scraped against the deck. Weapons were checked, rechecked. Every man in the cabin understood. If they were caught before the first shot, there would be no battle, only an execution. The transport's landing thrusters engaged, sending a ripple of vibration through the hull. Ulrich exhaled, keeping his heartbeat steady. No alarms, no immediate resistance, just the dull clang of docking clamps, securing them into the Dominion's stronghold. A voice crackled through the comm. Dominion security, their tone board, authorization code. Rohan tapped a heads-up display, feeding the stolen credentials into the link. The seconds stretched. Ulrich could almost hear the Dominion officer's breath through the static. Then docking clearance granted. Welcome to Fornax Prime. The ramp lowered. The air smelled of coolant and scorched wiring. Dominion engineers moved along the catwalks, their postures relaxed, their thoughts focused on ship maintenance. The idea that an enemy might be walking among them never even entered their minds. Ulrich stepped forward, his strike team moving in perfect silence. They passed beneath the shadow of the Juggernaut, its armored hull stretching like a city above them, its engines idling in standby mode. Control rooms up that shaft, Victor murmured, eyes flicking to the nearest security checkpoint. 4 guards, armed but inattentive. Ulrich didn't hesitate. His knife flashed once. The first guard collapsed, throat slit before he could register what happened. Victor took the second, muffling a dying gasp beneath his gloved hand. The third turned, eyes widening, mouth opening, before a silenced round buried itself in his skull. The last Dominion soldier fumbled for his weapon, staggering back. He barely got a sound out before Rohan drove a blade up beneath his ribs, twisting just enough to make sure he never got back up. Quick and clean, Ulrich murmured. Move. They slipped into the warship's lower decks, their boots pressing against cold steel. The air was thick with the faint tang of reactor exhaust, the deep thrum of machinery pulsing beneath their feet. Voss's voice crackled over the comm. Fornax just ran a security ping. You need to get that ship online now. Ulrich reached the bridge access terminal. Rohan, the demolitions expert, worked fast, hands gliding over Dominion tech like it was second nature. Give me 60 seconds. They didn't have 60 seconds. The overhead lights flared red. An alert sequence engaging. A Dominion officer, likely monitoring dockside feeds, had caught something wrong. Victor swore, "We're out of time." Eric tapped his comm. "Voss, trigger the diversion." Outside on the far side of Fornax Prime, an explosion ripped through Dock 3, sending a fireball into the upper atmosphere. The Dominion's defense grid flared to life, alarms screaming. The entire station rumbled as security teams scrambled toward the detonation point. Just as planned, Rawson smashed the final security override, and the Juggernaut systems roared awake. Reactors flared, weapon systems hummed. The ship breathed. Arik slammed the comms open. "All teams, we have the ship. Get ready for hell." The first Dominion boarding team stormed onto the docks, plasma rifles raised. The strike team dug in, firing from the warship's lower bulkheads. Energy rounds seared the air, melting through metal as the Dominion retaliated. Arik vaulted over cover, putting a round straight through a Dominion enforcer's visor. The alien collapsed, its rifle clattering against the deck. Rawson detonated a stagger mine, sending 3 more tumbling back in a concussive shockwave. Victor was already moving, his rifle barking rapid bursts. "That door's not gonna hold forever." Arik didn't look back. It doesn't have to. He sprinted to the Juggernaut's primary bridge, sliding into the command chair. The ship's systems flared to life around him, targeting redouts locking onto enemy signatures, shield generators cycling power. This warship was no longer Dominion property. Arik tapped into the ship-wide comms, his voice a calm storm. "All stations, this is Draven. We are taking this war machine, and anyone who stands in our way will burn." The Dominion fleet was already scrambling, warships breaking formation to intercept, but it was too late. The Juggernaut's main thrusters engaged, breaking free of the dock's locks. The Vanguard's wrath and the rest of their fleet decloaked, raining hell upon Fornax Prime. "Punch it," Victor barked. Arik slammed the command relay, and the Juggernaut surged forward, breaking through the last remnants of the dock's barriers. Explosions bloomed in their wake as Dominion fighters scrambled to intercept. Too slow, too unprepared. For the first time, human hands commanded a Dominion dreadnought, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Juggernaut surged through the void, its colossal frame cutting through the darkness like a blade drawn across a throat. The stolen Dominion warship was no longer just a trophy. It was the first stroke in a war that would carve humanity's name into the stars. But they weren't free yet. Eric Draven stood at the command bridge, his fingers braced against the edge of the console as the heads-up display mapped the shifting enemy formations. Dominion warships were already converging, their battle groups adjusting in real time to block every escape vector. Victor Reyes exhaled sharply beside him, his jaw set like stone. "They're not letting us go without a fight." Eric's gaze flicked over the tactical layout. "Let them try." The Vanguard's wrath and the rest of their ragtag fleet had already broken formation, slipping into the wreckage fields beyond Fornax Prime. There was only one reason the Dominion hadn't opened fire yet. They wanted their ship back intact. "A mistake." Voss's voice crackled over the comms. "Draven, you better have something up your sleeve, because I count 26 ships inbound and only 3 of ours in fighting shape." Eric's grip tightened on the console. "Then it's time we spring the trap." The Dominion believed they had humanity cornered. They didn't realize they'd walked into an execution chamber. "Ravern," Eric called, not looking away from the screen. "Is the net ready?" The demolitions expert's grin could be heard through the comms. "Locked and waiting, just say the word." Eric nodded once. "Wait for the signal. Let them think we're running first." Victor studied him, something unreadable in his expression. "You always this confident when the walls close in?" Eric glanced at him, his voice quiet but firm. "No, just this prepared." The first Dominion battle cruisers closed in, their engines burning bright as they formed a blockade, cutting off the only visible escape path. A standard Dominion tactic: herd the enemy, box them in, then crush them. They had no idea what was coming. "Helm," Eric ordered. "Bring us about. Make it look sloppy, like we're panicking." The Juggernaut lurched, its trajectory shifting erratically, like a cornered animal scrambling for an opening. Dominion warships adjusted, their formations tightening. The net was drawing closed. Vanguard's wrath: "What's your status?" Eric asked. Voss's reply came through. "Holding position. Whatever you're planning, do it fast, because they're locking weapons." A wreck turned toward Rovern, lighted up. A chain reaction of detonations ignited across the debris field, explosions blooming in quick succession, shredding Dominion formations before they even had a chance to react. The minefield had been hidden within the wreckage, waiting rigged to tear through enemy hulls the moment they got too comfortable. The first battle cruiser took a direct hit, its shields flaring white-hot before buckling. Secondary blasts ripped through its flanks, and then with a final groan of twisted metal, the ship folded in on itself, breaking apart in a cascade of fire and wreckage. Panic rippled through the Dominion fleet. A wreck didn't wait for them to regroup. All ships engage. The Vanguard's wrath and the scavenged warships surged from the wreckage, weapons blazing. Kinetic slugs tore through weakened hulls, missile volleys found their marks, and frigates spun into attack runs, hammering the disoriented Dominion forces. A battle that had seemed one-sided just seconds ago was now a slaughter. The Juggernaut's primary cannon charged, its core reactors cycling energy into the spinal-mounted weapon. The targeting systems locked onto the largest Dominion dreadnought still standing. Arek's voice was ice. Fire. The superheated lance of energy ripped through the void, a beam of concentrated destruction that pierced the Dominion ship from bow to stern. The reactor imploded, and the dreadnought erupted in a violent, blinding detonation, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. Silence. For the first time in all the years of human subjugation, a Dominion armada had been broken. The surviving enemy vessels hesitated, their captains facing a reality none of them had ever imagined. They weren't hunting prey anymore. They were being hunted. Victor watched the remaining Dominion ships, his voice lower now. They're rattled. Eric nodded, his gaze never leaving the screen. They should be. The comms flared to life, an encrypted Dominion channel breaking through. The voice was thick with anger, but underneath it was something else, something rare. Doubt, this is Commander Varen of the Dominion Third Fleet. You have seized property of the Empire. If you surrender now, your lives will be considered in our negotiations. Victor let out a sharp laugh. That's a new one. They don't even know what to do with us. Eric stepped toward the command terminal, his fingers brushing the control interface. He tapped into the open frequency. His voice calm, steady. Commander Varen, he said, look at your battlefield. Look at your losses. Then ask yourself, who should be negotiating? Silence. For the first time, a Dominion fleet commander had no response. The remnants of the Dominion forces didn't wait for orders. They turned tail and jumped to FTL, abandoning the battle. Eric exhaled, slow and measured. They had done more than just win a fight. They had shattered the illusion of Dominion supremacy. Voss's voice broke through the comms. Breathless, Draven, I don't know how the hell you pulled that off, but I'll be damned if it wasn't beautiful. Rowan grinned. Tell me someone recorded that transmission. I want to hear that Dominion bastard choke on his pride again. Victor shook his head, his expression unreadable. They'll be back, and next time they won't underestimate us. Eric stared at the battlefield, at the burning remains of once unstoppable warships. He knew Victor was right. This war wasn't over. Not by a long shot, but this battle, it was humanity's first real strike. And now the entire Dominion knew what was coming. The Juggernaut's bridge was silent, save for the occasional flicker of status readouts and the quiet breath of men who knew they had just rewritten history. The shattered remains of the Dominion fleet drifted in the darkness, the echoes of their destruction still lingering in the air like a ghost of battle. But Eric Draven wasn't looking at the wreckage. He was looking at Earth. It hung there, wounded and raw, its orbit scarred by the Dominion's occupation forces. The Dominion had taken Earth not because they needed it, but because it was a message, a declaration that humanity would never rise, never resist, never be more than what the galaxy had decided for them. Now the message had changed. A silent transmission flickered across the heads-up display, looping through encrypted Dominion channels. Eric tapped the control, pulling it into focus. The grainy feed stabilized, revealing a Cordrath officer, his rigid posture betraying the weight of what he was about to say. This is Commander Vahern of the Dominion Corps Command. Earth is under our jurisdiction. You will surrender the stolen warship immediately, or we will erase the last remnants of your species from existence. Victor Ress let out a sharp breath, crossing his arms. He's bluffing. Arek's gaze stayed locked on the screen. No, he isn't. The heads-up display flickered again, shifting to an orbital scan. Dominion war platforms were positioned above Earth like vultures over a dying beast. Heavy siege cannons, the kind designed to glass entire cities, stood at full charge. If Vahern gave the order, Earth wouldn't burn. It would cease to exist. Voss's voice crackled through the comms. Draven, if we push this any further, they'll wipe out every last human on that planet. Arek stared at the blinking cursor on the transmission terminal. He could feel the weight of a million voices, silent but waiting, watching. We break their fleet here, Arek said, his voice steady. We make sure they never come back. Victor exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. You keep making these impossible calls, Draven, and somehow we keep surviving. Arek glanced at him, his expression unreadable. Then let's survive again. The Juggernaut's engines surged, throwing the massive warship into a full-speed charge toward Earth's orbit. The remaining Dominion ships moved to intercept, but it was too late. The trap was already set. Rowan's voice came through, sharp with excitement. Draven, you're gonna love this. Vanguard's Wrath just dropped a little parting gift in their supply lanes. EMP payload. Whole sectors about to go blind. Arek nodded once. Do it. A pulse of electromagnetic disruption spread through the Dominion's defensive grid, scrambling targeting systems and throwing entire battalions into confusion. Turrets locked up, missile arrays went dark, and their own coordination collapsed in the span of seconds. The Juggernaut tore into the Dominion's orbital fleet, its forward cannons unloading a storm of devastation that ripped warships apart before they could even adjust. Target their siege cannons, Arek ordered, gripping the command interface. Victor's hands flew over the control relays, locking in firing solutions. The Juggernaut's primary weapon ignited, sending a torrential beam of raw energy into the nearest Dominion platform. The station cracked apart, the force of the detonation sending debris cascading down into the upper atmosphere. Arek's voice was ice. Next, one by one the siege platforms fell, their destruction lighting up the sky above Earth like dying suns. Vahern's face reappeared on the transmission feed, his composure finally cracking. Behind him, officers scrambled, their movements frantic. The Dominion had never known fear like this before. You have no idea what you are doing, Vahern hissed. Even if you succeed here, the Dominion will hunt you to the edges of the galaxy. They will never stop. Arek stared at him, voice calm. Neither will we. The final siege cannon detonated, sending a shockwave rippling across the void. The Dominion fleet scattered, their warships turning tail, retreating before they suffered the same fate. Earth was free. The Juggernaut's bridge fell silent, the weight of what they had just done settling into the bones of every man standing there. Then Rohan let out a low, incredulous laugh. We actually did it. Voss's voice came through the comms, quiet but unshaken. Draven, you just made humanity the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Arretic stepped forward, watching as the burning wreckage of the Dominion fleet drifted past them. The stars, for the first time in generations, were theirs. He tapped the comms, opening a direct line to every human survivor across the system. His voice was steady, carrying through the void. To every Dominion officer listening, Earth is no longer yours. To every human still breathing, your chains are broken. And to the ones who took us, who thought they could break us, we are coming for you. The Juggernaut's bridge was deathly quiet, save for the muted clicks of control relays and the distant murmurs of crew processing what they had just done. Below them, Earth was whole again. Its sky clearing of Dominion ruin. The war was far from over, but the first, most impossible step had been taken. Arretic Draven's fingers tapped against the console as he studied the laser plasma display before him. The Dominion had fled, but not in defeat. They were regrouping. Victor Rosas leaned beside him, voice low. You know they won't run forever. They're licking their wounds, sharpening their knives. Arretic didn't look up. That's why we don't give them the chance. Voss's voice crackled through the comms, his tone unreadable. I assume you already have a plan. Arretic's gaze locked onto a single red-marked system flashing on the display. Chorus Prime, the Dominion's homeworld, the heart of their empire. We take the war to them, Arretic said. A silence stretched between the men. Even Victor, who had followed him through every impossible battle, didn't mask his disbelief. You're talking about launching a full-scale invasion of the most fortified world in the galaxy, Victor said slowly. Arretic nodded once. No one's ever done it before. That's why it'll work. Rohan exhaled sharply from his seat at the comm station. We have one stolen warship and a patchwork fleet held together with hope and sheer rage. The Dominion will throw everything they have at us. Exactly, Arretic said. And we'll let them. Victor's brow furrowed. You want to bait them? Arretic tapped the screen, zooming in on Chorus Prime's defensive grid. The Dominion doesn't lose wars. They rewrite the rules until they win. They'll want to erase the idea that humanity ever resisted. That means pulling their entire force back to Chorus Prime to make an example of us. Voss's voice came through the channel again. A suicide charge won't change anything, Draven. It'll just get us killed faster. Arretic's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. That's the point. We make them think we're desperate, that we're throwing everything we have into a doomed last stand. Victor's gaze darkened with understanding. And while they're watching us, Arretic nodded, we cut their throat from the inside. The Dominion relied on fear. They ruled through absolute control of information, their war networks feeding real-time battle data to every sector of their empire. That was their greatest strength, and their greatest vulnerability. Arretic turned to Rohan. How much of their comms did we scrape from Fornax? Rohan whistled, tapping a flickering display beside him. More than they'd be comfortable with. Security access codes, encryption layers. Hell, we even pulled fleet movement patterns from their command logs. Good, Arretic said. We feed them false data, make them believe our entire fleet is mobilizing toward Chorus Prime. We'll send decoy ships, transmit open comm chatter about a full-scale invasion, get them so focused on the front line that they don't see the dagger at their back. We feed them. In Victor's arms crossed. And the dagger? Burke exhaled, his gaze steady. The juggernaut, a sharp pause. Then Rohan let out a low laugh. You're serious? You want to slip this beast through their security net while their eyes are on the decoy fleet? Rohan nodded. It's Dominion built, we disguise its signature, patch its clearance codes into their network. If we move fast enough, they'll think we're just another warship returning to the home fleet. Voss sounded almost amused. And once we're in, Burke's fingers drummed against the console. We cut the head off the snake. The Shadow Fleet moved first, hastily assembled Dominion hulls rigged with transmission beacons, broadcasting fake invasion chatter into every intercepted channel. The Dominion responded as expected, pulling warfleets from their outer colonies, directing them to reinforce Chorus Prime. At the same time, the Juggernaut drifted through the Dominion's security perimeter, its stolen identification codes threading through automated checkpoints. Inside the bridge, Rohan kept his voice steady. All crew, keep transmissions silent. Any deviations, and we're dead. The tension was suffocating. They passed through the first checkpoint, then the second, then the third. The home fleet's warships loomed all around them, their patrol routes brushing dangerously close. Final checkpoint ahead, Victor murmured, his fingers tight against his sidearm. Rohan leaned forward, scanning the data feed. One of the Dominion officers at the checkpoint was stalling, running secondary scans. Something's wrong, Rohan muttered. The checkpoint sent a query ping, a request for crew identification logs. Rohan's heart steadied into something cold. They're going to flag us, Victor said. Rohan's Sidic acted before the thought had time to settle. Override the response package. Push the delay protocol we pulled from Fornax. Rohan's hands flew over the controls, injecting corrupted data packets into the checkpoint's processing queue. For a breathless second, nothing happened. Then green light clearance. The Juggernaut slid past the final security checkpoint. They were inside the Dominion's most fortified stronghold. Chorus Prime unfolded before them, a city world built on the backs of 1,000 conquered races, its skyline carved from imperial arrogance and blood-stained wealth. Below, miles of war factories churned out weaponry, the endless cycle of an empire that believed itself eternal. Rohan didn't look at the city. He was watching the central command tower, the beating heart of the Dominion's rule. We go in quiet, he said. We plant the payload, sever their war networks, and get out before they even realize we were here. Rohan gave a sharp nod. EMP charges are prepped, targeting central relay hubs. Once they go dark, the entire Dominion fleet goes blind. Victor's grip tightened on his weapon. And if they catch us before we plant the charges, Arohank's voice was a blade, then we finish what we started, the loud way. The boarding teams move fast, slipping through the warship's lower hangars onto the city's infrastructure hubs. Dominion patrols were everywhere, but they didn't expect an attack inside their own walls. The infiltration was surgical. EMP charges were set, relay towers rigged to collapse, command hubs seated with scrambled firewalls that would sever their ability to coordinate military forces. They were halfway through when the alarms triggered. Arohank's earpiece flared to life. Voss's voice was sharp. They found the decoy fleet, they're turning their warships back. Victor's eyes flicked to Eric. How much time do we have? Arohank didn't hesitate. Not enough. The Dominion's planetary defenses activated, and suddenly the hunters had become the hunted. A Dominion strike team breached the lower access tunnels, weapons raised, energy blasts seared through the air, tearing into metal plating. Arohank slammed a detonator into Victor's hands. Get to the relay hub, set off the charges. Victor didn't argue, he ran. The Dominion forces surged forward, and Eric met them head-on. The gunfire hadn't stopped. The corridors of Chorus Prime's command center were still thick with the burning heat of plasma rounds, the scent of charred bodies clinging to the air. Emergency sirens howled, but it no longer mattered. The Dominion's heart had been pierced. Eric Draven moved through the chaos with practiced efficiency, rifle raised, eyes sharp. He wasn't thinking about survival. He was thinking about the end. Victor's voice crackled through the comms, rough with exertion. Charges are set. 5 minutes before the relay hub goes dark, Eric ducked behind a support column. As Dominion enforcers rushed down the hall, weapons firing, he turned, snapping off 2 quick shots, one to the skull, the other center mass. The bodies collapsed before they could process. They were dead. Voss's voice came through the channel, urgency cutting through the static. Draven, the Dominion fleet's turning back. You need to move. Now Eric wasn't moving until he saw Vorin bleed. The corridor leading to the primary command chamber was lined with dying Dominion officers. Their bodies slumped against consoles that still flickered with fractured data. The control center was a war zone. Security turrets sparked, smoke curled from exposed wiring, and overhead displays sputtered with distorted fleet movements. A visual representation of an empire unraveling. Vorin stood at the center of it all. His polished uniform was torn, his calculated arrogance cracked. He had always believed in the Dominion's permanence, in its inevitability. Now as he turned to face Eric, something shifted in his expression, recognition, fear. You don't understand what you've done, Vorin rasped, blood dripping from a wound on his temple. This empire has stood for centuries. You think you've won, you think humanity has changed anything. Auric didn't lower his weapon. We didn't come to change it, he said, stepping closer. We came to end it. Vorin exhaled sharply, something between a laugh and a scoff. He glanced at the burning control panels, the scattered Dominion corpses, the flickering tactical displays that showed his fleet in full retreat. His voice was quieter. Now, you're animals. Auric's jaw tightened, but his hand was steady. Then you should have caged us better. A distant explosion rattled the facility, tremors shaking through the structure as the relay hub detonated. The Dominion's war network collapsed in real time, cutting off fleet commands, scrambling communications. The entire empire had gone blind in an instant. Vorin's breath hitched. He could see it now. The inevitability of what came next. The Dominion's backbone had been snapped. The war was no longer a question of battles, but of survival. Auric stepped forward, leveling his weapon at the last remaining high commander of a dying empire. This is where it ends, Vorin. The Dominion officer straightened, despite the blood smeared across his jaw, shaking his head slowly. You don't understand war, human. You don't know what it means to rule. You think you've won because you broke one world. The Dominion is bigger than this. Auric's finger hovered over the trigger. No, it isn't. The shot was clean. One round. No hesitation. Vorin staggered back, collapsing onto the Dominion emblem etched into the floor, his blood spreading across the insignia that had once symbolized unchallenged rule. And with that, the last breath of Dominion authority left Chorus Prime. Ol 1. Victor's voice came through the comms. Relay hubs finished. We need to go. Auric exhaled, lowering his rifle as he stared at Voron's still form. He turned, stepping over the bodies of those who had once ruled a galaxy, and walked out. The juggernaut surged through the atmosphere, its engines cutting through the choking smog of Chorus Prime. Below, the once proud capital city was in full collapse. Riots surged through the streets, Dominion forces splintered into infighting, and the iron grip that had enslaved 1,000 species was fracturing with every passing second. On board, Voss stood with arms crossed, watching as the tactical display updated. He shook his head, eyes dark with something between awe and disbelief. "This is it," he muttered. "We actually broke them." Rohan let out a sharp breath, running a hand through his sweat-matted hair. "I thought they'd fight harder." Auric was silent for a moment, staring at the shifting battle reports. They never expected to lose. The Dominion's remaining fleets were in disarray, scattered without central command, their war networks severed. The once mighty empire had been reduced to fragmented warlords, each scrambling to carve out whatever power they could salvage. It was over. Victor stepped up beside Auric. "What happens now?" Auric looked out at the burning capital below. The Dominion had fallen, but humanity's war wasn't over. He turned to Voss. "Get the transmission relays back online. I want every Dominion-controlled system to hear this." Rohan let out a low chuckle. "And what message are we sending?" Auric stared at the laser plasma display, at the shattered wreckage of what had once been an empire, and finally, let himself breathe. He tapped the comms. His voice was even, carrying through every surviving Dominion channel, to every world still under their fading grip. To the species still in chains, your masters are gone. You are free. To the Dominion officers still hiding in their bunkers, your empire is over. If you run, we will find you. If you resist, we will bury you. And to those who enslaved us, who took our people, who thought we would break, we are coming for you." The transmission cut. The silence that followed was absolute. Voss exhaled slowly, shaking his head. Hell of a way to start a new era. Auric turned away from the screen, stepping toward the Juggernaut's command chair. He didn't feel triumph. He didn't feel relief. Only purpose. "Let's finish what we started," he said. And with that, humanity rose from the ashes, not just as survivors but as the architects of a new galaxy.